Welcome back to Project Daily Drive, where today we're going to do something that I probably should have started this series with. Let's talk about what's wrong with my dearly beloved Morris Minor. Well, this is my 1966 Morris Minor, called Jean, which is the name of my grandma. And if you don't know, this is my daily drive, hence the name of the video, Project Daily Drive. I use this every day. At least I did until recently. I'll get into that later. I haven't bought a new car yet. So, this is my Morris Minor and it's my pride and joy, but unfortunately there's an awful lot wrong with her, which is why at the moment it's off the road. I do use it, it's just not if I can avoid it. So what's wrong? Well, let's go through it. I'm going to go through structural, mechanical and cosmetic, because I think that's the easiest way to go through this. Let's start. How is this car structurally? It's okay. Really, that's the best description I could give you. It's not great and it's not horrific. It's just okay. It's like every single Morris Minor on the road, Jean suffers from rust pretty chronically. And underneath this car isn't a very nice place to look. I would show you, but that means I have to look at it and then edit it, and that'd make me really sad, so I'm not going to do that. So I'll go over what needs to happen, and it's stuff that I'm unfortunately not able to do. The rear chassis legs at the back, one needs replacing and one needs a section of it welding in, which I have priced up for and I'm saving up for at the moment. And the front passenger chassis leg needs some work as well. It's pretty grotty. I've already had the cross member done. That was entirely replaced on one side. I've got the piece, I'll show you later on, because it had cracked and made the car unsafe to drive. Apart from that, the floors are pretty horrible, but they are strong, but they have been overplated, so I'm going to go through at some point next year and replace them. And the inner wing arches are all right. There's a bit of surface rust on the inside. That side had to be patched because there was a hole in it. It's okay. It's not unsafe. It just looks really scary, but I am planning on doing that. Unfortunately, I won't be able to do it myself. Mechanically, this car is actually really good. The mechanics of this car has always been its strong point for me. It starts every time, it runs, the gearbox is great, it's noisy, but it never jumps out of gear, it never has any horrible noises, never has any issues. The rear diff isn't making any funny noises. The brakes are excellent. They were all replaced last year. I did them myself at the front, and then they got checked over by a mechanic who did the back. So new cylinders, new master cylinder, new shoes. The only thing I didn't do, which I regret, is I didn't replace the drums. They were okay, but I really wish I'd actually replaced those, which I'm going to do when I come to replace the shoes. The engine, up until last month, was fantastic. I'll get into that one in a moment. The suspension isn't great, if I'm honest, and that's one of the things that I'm going to be covering later down the line. This side, the suspension on the driver's front, was all rebuilt when the crossmember was done. If you don't know about Morris Minor suspension, it's torsion bar at the front. So that was all rebuilt, new bushings, new kingpin, everything. Other side, knocks like you wouldn't believe. That entirely needs rebuilding, something I'm going to tackle pretty soon, if I'm honest. And at the rear, it needs replacing. The springs are completely past it. The shocks don't do anything. My plan is to actually remove the rear axle and service it because there's a small leak on it. Which is going to be a terrifying job, but I'm going to tackle that around the time that the rear welding gets done, just so I can do the work on that. Steering wise, it's great. It handles nice, the steering's nice and light, it's very responsive. I think the steering rack was replaced on this car, it looks very new, and everything else on it works fine. There isn't much to go wrong, it's a very basic car. It's infuriating though because the engine has gone wrong. If you've never seen a Morris Minor engine before, this is what one looks like, or at least one that hasn't been cleaned in a while. This is the engine out of Jean. It is the 1098, the largest engine that was ever fitted to a Morris Minor, and until last month this thing ran beautifully. It ran sweet as a nut. It starts every time, it never really has any problems. Even in winter on the coldest days, this thing only ever failed to start twice, and both of those was because the alternator, well, the dynamo at the time had failed and the battery was shot. Once I got it boosted, it started. I've never had any problems with the engine until last month. The issue that plagues every single Morris Minor engine is that they suffer from a bit of fuel starvation if they get really hot, which is why a lot of people would put a deflector where the carburettor is. Notice I don't have one. This was stock when I got it. And when it overheats in traffic, it suffers from fuel starvation, but I've got a problem with the ignition system, which means that it's not sparking properly. I've been having issues with getting this thing to start, and even worse, stopping in traffic. And when it stops in traffic, it won't restart until it's cooled down. It's a right nightmare. I'm going to stand up because my knee is killing me. I'm going to replace a lot of the ignition system because there's a lot of problems with it. The coil has a tiny oil leak, which is a disaster. I've got a brand new coil. I'm also going to replace the distributor because that's quite worn. There's quite a bit of wear in there. And I'm going to replace the HT leads. I want to clean up my wiring. This is my wiring, by the way. So that all needs replacing. And I'm going to put in a heat deflector onto the carburettor. What I don't want to do is have to put an electric fan on this thing to keep it cool. I may have to do that, however, because I daily this. So right now, that's going to be the most... Well, that's going to be the job that I'm going to do first because it desperately needs doing. But apart from that, the engine's really, really good. I don't have any issues with it. It's a really nice engine. How are the electrics on this car? Well, fantastic. I don't really have any issues with the electrical system itself, it's just the things on the end that have some issues. The wiring loom is the original and is a bit battered, but runs fine. I very rarely have any issues with it. The wipers work perfectly fine, the horn's great, the lights are fine, they don't flicker or anything like that. The heater works, but it's noisy, and that's really the extent of the electrical system because it's so basic in this car. The only thing that I've added was a cigarette light, which I'm going to remove, but that's for a later video. And that's it. It's dead basic. There are a few issues, however. The wiper motor needs a rebuild because it's a bit weak, and in the snow, and especially in heavy rain, it gets a bit overwhelmed and starts to slow down. Likewise, I need to replace the headlamps because they're imbalanced, and I'm going to replace them with sealed beams rather than halogen. And I'll explain why in that video. The light lenses also need replacing because the plastic has given up on them. One on the back is about to fall off. And I'm going to replace a lot of the lights with LEDs to make it better on the road. The binnacle on the dashboard, the speedometer, has some issues. Only the lights at 80 and 90 work on it at night, which means that I can't see the speeds that my car's actually doing, which is fine because the speedometer is useless anyway. And I have a minor fault with the indicators. In fact, it's so minor and so irregular that I haven't been able to replicate it for this video, but occasionally when I'm in traffic and I'm indicating right, it won't fire. So I have to pull the stalk slightly towards me and then it'll actually work. It's a loose connection in there. I would have sorted it ages ago, but I don't have a big enough socket to take the steering wheel off. Whoops. How is this car cosmetically? Terrible, all of it. Okay, it's not actually that bad. The reason that the paint's so dull is because there's no wax covering it. It needs a clean up. This was because where I lived, the paint really just got tacked. Where I lived, I didn't have any opportunity to wash the car. There was no power supply or water supply, and I lived right next to a building site. So this thing was constantly covered in a layer of concrete dust. Every single time I tried to clean it, it came out worse, so I just gave up. I would have taken it to a place that would clean it professionally, but the last time I did that, they stuck a pressure washer under the wheel arch and coated the electrics of the car in water. And I couldn't drive it for an hour because I had to wait for it to dry out. That was fantastic. But the paint is fine, it just needs a bit of a clean up, a bit of a waxing, and then it'll be up to its shiny state again. I had it like that last year, it's just a bit of neglect. Speaking of neglect, the chrome is pretty past it, all of it. The chrome bumpers are pretty good, but the boot and the bonnet hinges, the light binnacles, they're all very pitted. But it matches the paint of the car, so I'm going to do what every other classic car owner who owns a classic car like mine and just ignore it. Just not going to do anything about that. But that's how the cosmetics on the car are so far. Naturally, that isn't everything. There is an awful lot wrong with this car, but an awful lot of the jobs are so tiny and minuscule that, well, they're not worth talking about here, but they are worth fixing. For example, I have really, really wide tyres on this car. I have van wheels, and because of that, the spare doesn't fit in the wheel well. And because of that, it sat behind my passenger seat because I needed to use the boot to move out of my old flat. And every single rubber grommet on this car has completely perished and needs replacing. Little jobs like that I'm going to be covering later down the line. But in total, the car is actually really good. It is a 53-year-old unrestored car, and because of that, it comes with 53 years of absolute nonsense and dodgy repair work. But we're going to be fixing all of that. Now back to that thing I was talking about earlier about this not being my daily, even though it is my daily. There's a lot of rust underneath this car, and Britain salts its roads in winter, so I'm just not going to be driving it. I'm currently unemployed, please hire me, and looking for a job. And no matter where I get a job, I'm going to commute on public transport because I can't afford another car yet. It's just a preventative measure. I need to save up for work to do the rust on the car, but at the same time, because there's holes, salt's going to get in, it's going to make life so much worse. And this means that I've not got the stress of having to get the car back on the road when something goes wrong, which has been my main problem this past year. I am planning on getting a more modern car. I'm not necessarily going to get a brand new modern car. I have an idea for a car, but we will see. But for right now, this is going to remain my only car, so I want to get it in tip-top shape. My eventual plan for this thing is, in fact, a total restoration, something that I have planned for ever since I actually bought the thing nearly 2 years ago. But I'm not going to do that for a good long time because it's expensive and I am poor. I'm also planning on doing some upgrades to this car, upgrades that I'm going to talk about in another video. But for now, this is what I've got. The next episode should be focusing on getting this engine to run properly. Please, because I don't want to cause tailbacks again. I already got yelled at for doing that last time. Thank you very much for watching. See you all in the next one. Bye bye.